Hello, good people, hello. Right, so firstly, you guys came back from lunch. I applaud you, I thank you very much. The options were to go out, sit in the sun, have a drink, soak up, all of that good stuff out there. But you came back to listen to me talking about that dirty word regulation, right? So you are good people, and I appreciate it. As Finn said, my name is Ali. I'm going to be speaking to you about data regulation. And in many ways, the title of the slide is a conceit, because it implies that it's inevitable and that it's coming. But in many ways, it's already here. It's all around us. And I guess for all of you as founders and employees who are working at startups and really thinking about how do you build an amazing product to reach your customers, this is one of the things that you're going to have to really come to grips with. And hopefully, in the next 5, 10, 15 minutes, I'll share some messages with all of you that hopefully help you along on that journey. So let's just get into it. Whenever you really think about what is the equation that defines success for a startup, there are many, many factors, but the top 4 are probably these things, right? So you need to have the right problem, first of all. Have you really thought about what it is that you're trying to solve? And it's not enough to identify the problem. Alongside that, you have to have the right solution. So much discussion happens around having product market fit. And I think those 2 things are really core aspects of choosing what your business focuses on. But you kind of have to divide the right problem and having the right solution with 2 other variables: having the right team and having enough money, right? So many conversations that I have with founders, with people that I work with, people that I support, is all about making sure that the team is able to execute the idea of the founder and the investors and everybody else, and that the investors and the community is able to support the ambition while the startup, while your company is trying to execute and deliver on whatever your ambitious idea was. And as Finn alluded to, and what I'm talking about today, alongside that equation, you now have to think about regulation. One more thing, right? One more overhead maybe, one more area that just seems so difficult to grapple with. But I think it's important to just internalize now that regulation is one of those things that for you as a founder is going to be important from day one, when you sketch out your idea on the back of a napkin, through to all of those investor pitches, all of those conversations you're going to have as you try and onboard customers, as you try and go to market, as you try and scale up, as you try and build a successful business. And the reason is that regulators like the one I work for, so my name's Ali Shah, I'm head of technology policy at the UK Information Commissioner's Office. And by the way, that's the Information Commissioner up on screen, Elizabeth Denham. So I work for her office, and our role is really to think about what is the role of personal data? How do we make sure that the rights and freedoms that citizens, individuals have are protected, that individuals, all of you, if you take off your corporate lanyards or your startup lanyards, all of you as individuals, how do you make sure that you have the right and ability to leverage your rights? And the sorts of regulation and the sorts of things that we do in the UK for UK citizens are mirrored across Europe, but also here in the US, the FTC and others will have a slightly different variation of what I'm going to be talking about, but they all care about similar things, the role of personal data. For the UK Commissioner, for example, her powers extend to being able to do some scary stuff. She can come in if she feels that there is an issue and task us, me, and others in the organization to conduct compulsory audits, come in and look at what you're doing. She can, if she thinks that through our investigation something really terrible is happening, issue what we call a stop no processing order, so stop doing what you're doing. And if things really get bad, we have the powers to fine up to 4% of global revenue. But in many ways, if we get to that point, it's been a collective failure. We don't really want to sanction anybody. We don't really want to have to use those powers. So the other part of the role is really important. And it's really around how do we promote innovation in this space, supporting entrepreneurs and businesses so that they can do what they do best, you can do what you do best, while helping you understand what are the obligations that we are all required to adhere to because we live in a democracy or as part of a society. And again, a lot of my sort of messages will be coming from the UK perspective, but they have parallels to the work that you might be doing here in the US. And you should also be thinking about this because if on your growth plan for your business, you're really thinking about how do we reach other markets, how do we become international, how do we have a global presence, understanding what data regulation means is going to be really important. And just one more sort of word on the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office. If you hadn't heard of the Information Commissioner before, I imagine that you've heard of Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. Well, it's worth knowing that the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, the organization I work for, was responsible for investigating those issues. And at the time that the ICO investigated those, we didn't have the scale of the powers that we now have. The outcomes would have been much more different, but we were the lead authority tasked with trying to deal with the fallout from Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. And that's because personal data is so central to so many of our online experiences. I find it really difficult to imagine a business that really isn't at some level interacting with consumer, customer data, personal data. My team is really focused on a few different things. I'll just give you a quick flavor. Everything from how do you deploy machine learning, AI tools and technologies in a way that is privacy preserving? What should we do in response to facial recognition? How do we enable data sharing? All of these things at their heart have this central question, which is, what does it mean for our society to make use of personal data? And it's worth noting that there are slightly different variations in the definition of personal data, whether you're in the US, in the UK, or elsewhere. For the UK and most of the EU, it's not just information that's directly, obviously relevant to you, like your name or your email address, but also information that could be inferred about you through proxies. So as an example, here in the US, your zip code is often used as a proxy for your race. You can, depending on the data that you have access to and the techniques that you might apply, infer somebody's race simply from the zip code that they live in. And because of that, and because of some trends that we're noticing, it's really important to start to think about, well, how do you prepare? So just a quick couple of minutes on some of the trends. Personal data sharing is going to increase. The fact that you're all here pitching for your ideas, really promoting what you're trying to do, I imagine the vast majority of you are really going to rely on understanding who your customers are. And so that sharing of personal data is going to carry on. But alongside that, the societal distress that we are seeing from people feeling like companies don't care about what's happening to them, they might feel manipulated, they might not trust institutions, they might have seen what the press is saying, they might feel that technologies are being deployed that track and manipulate them. All of these societal issues are going to carry on as well. And they're going to converge with what the regulators think about. So the ICO is the data regulator in the UK, but we work alongside the Competitions Authority. We have conversations with the FTC. We talk globally with other regulators. We're all starting to really recognize that our jobs are to come together and really make sure that citizens are able to have somebody represent them. The trick, of course, is to try and do that in a way that also supports businesses so that we allow businesses who want to do the right thing to be able to do the right thing. And the last thing I just want to note on a trend that we've started to notice is that privacy being considered at the design stage of a business is going to start to become a USP. It's already something that companies like Apple are really emphasizing. If you were at CES in January, or if you've really seen some of the press of the last year, you probably noticed that. So it's worth really reflecting on these sorts of trends and thinking about how will you position your business and your idea and your startup and what you need to do. One of the things that I do with my team at the regulator is to really think about, have a thought experiment really, and try and put myself in your shoes and really think about, well, how can we use personal data to enable some amazing benefit for the customer without compromising their rights? And that thought experiment is really driven by my experience. I'm an engineer, by the way. I only joined the ICO less than 8 months ago. I used to work for a large media technology company. So a lot of my thought process is always around how do we solve the problem in a way that allows all parties to win, right? We need to find the right balance to the equation that allows business to do what it needs to do best, for all of you who are startup founders and working startups to do what you do amazingly well, while at the same time making sure that your customers, citizens, are able to feel like their rights are protected. At the moment you ask yourself that question, you start to realize something. Alongside product market fit, the other question that will pop into your mind is, well, what's the product society fit? Alongside identifying the right problem and then identifying the right solution, the question you're going to have to ask yourself is, well, is the approach we're taking the right approach? It's not only the what you're doing, it's also the how. So once we have that as something to talk around, have a discussion around, we can start to do a couple of things. We can start to understand why lots of the large tech sector companies are calling for more regulation. I mean, this is a quote from Mark Zuckerberg from last year, but I could have put a picture up of anybody from Apple, Google, you name it. Most of the large tech sector companies have really been talking about more regulation, the need for more regulation to protect citizens and consumer rights. Why is that? I think some of it is optics, if I'm honest, just making sure that the right messages are put out there. But I think hopefully some of it is recognizing that alongside product market fit, product society fit is a really important factor. But what can all of you do, right? So hopefully your aims will be that one day you're the size of a Facebook or a Google or an Apple. You've either exited and been able to cash out in an amazing way, or you've IPO'd, and you will be building the next 10, 20, 50-year, 100-year business that's successful. But right now, in this moment, when you're hustling, when you're trying to grow, what can you do to prepare? So just some tips from me, really. First one, how do you know which regulation impacts you? I actually get it. I mean, I've come from an engineering tech background. It's really difficult to make sense of, well, is it GDPR? What about the regulations in California? What does the federal state say? What about if we want to launch a business in the Far East? How are we going to make sense of that? Simple tip number one, just go onto the websites. Go onto the ICO's website. Don't be held back by thinking that it's UK-centric. So much of the messaging, the support, and the guidance that we offer will offer you lessons that you can quickly just make use of in your organizations. But if that's not enough, if the work pressure is too much, if there's other things that you need to focus on to promote the health of your business, then invest in somebody to come in. It will be the best money you have spent. It will be the best investment you have made, because having somebody to try and come in and act as your data protection officer will really insulate you against some of the challenges that you'll see when you try and scale up. Secondly, assess the risk. Are you using personal data as a core part of your value proposition? If you are, what are the likely risks that might occur from that? And the bottom half of my slide over there, the reason I emphasize VCs and why it's an opportunity for you to impress those who are likely to be funding your businesses is, make no mistake, we're talking to venture capitalists, angel investors, and others, and asking them to really reflect on the fact that, yes, they are there to take risky bets on startups. I mean, we wouldn't have all of these amazing companies here in the Valley if somebody hadn't taken a chance. But really, as part of the assessment process, we are encouraging them to do the same sort of risk assessment that we would expect from a more mature company. So we're asking those who are really offering you all the funding to go away and do the risk assessment. It's your opportunity as a startup founder to get ahead of that conversation. Do some of that risk analysis to say, well, here's the opportunity my business can deliver for the customer and for you. Here's the sorts of issues. Here's how we might take some action to manage that. And with that in mind, here's a really difficult one. Consider the unexpected. You know, how might your product fail your customer and your society? Nobody wants to start off talking about that, right? We always want to focus on the positive outcomes, what the product will deliver. But if in the Cambridge Analytica and Facebook example, you know, Cambridge Analytica was a relatively small company, look at what the consequences were of them not really thinking about how their business model might fail their customers and their society. And hopefully, all of you will not be impacted by this. You'll do that quick sort of assessment. You'll sit around a table with some coffees. You'll have that conversation, and you'll say, you know what, actually, we're OK. But it's the unintended consequences of how your products, your technology, your service might get used that will often catch you out. So again, it's worth your investment time, the time that you might take just to have that conversation with your mentors, your stakeholders, your investors, your teams to say, we've got this amazing idea, but what could happen if it went wrong? But one of the best things that you can do is really think about how do you design privacy in right from the start. Because if you do that, you start to create a foundation that helps build a business that can last decades. And recognize also that right now, in this moment in society, there is a gap. And any time there is a gap in how you deal with the sorts of problems we're seeing around privacy and our rights, there's an opportunity. So really think about for yourselves, well, does that provide you with the product market gap to really solve this problem for broader society? Your customers will thank you, regulators will thank you, we will all thank you. And if you do all of those things, I think answering this question about can your business identify the product market gap, is your startup set up in the right way, and how do you judge the product society gap will be a much easier equation to balance. That was all really from me. I just want to thank you for the sort of 10, 15 minutes that you've given me. I will be around for the next half an hour or so. If anyone wants to catch me, ask me any more detail about what regulation means, what's coming up, happy to do that. But in the meantime, thank you very much.